Before we can understand grace, we need to understand why we need God's grace, where justice and judgment plays into this. And I think the first thing we need to understand about it is that we all are sinners. When do we cry out for justice? Think about it. When do you cry out for justice? When yourself or other innocents have been wronged, right? That's when we cry out for justice. Our hearts burn within us when we hear the millions of Jewish people who were slaughtered during the Holocaust. And it causes us to just say, what is the sense of this? Where is the justice for this? It almost seems as if Hitler and his cronies did not receive the justice. As the coward that he was, he committed suicide in a bunker. It just seems, where is the justice? We remember that justice is not being administered to the thousands, was not ministered at that time to the thousands of African slaves who were treated so inhumanely by the slavers more than a century ago. And when we think back at that dark point in our history, it makes me think, where was the justice in those days? Where was the fairness? We cry with pain as we hear the millions of African children today who will die from the wretched disease of AIDS, not based on anything they have done. They're innocent in this regard. Where is the justice? We also desire justice when we watch in the news that a child was killed by a stray bullet in a gang shooting. And we cry out, where's the justice? And then it's peculiar that when we hear of two gang members who shoot each other, we believe there's been justice done. Isn't it interesting that the same moral outrage over the child that was innocently killed by a stray bullet is not present when two gang members shoot each other? In fact, recently here in that area where I live, in Kearns, there was a gang shooting where a gang member was killed. And some message boards on the editorial website, many people made the comment, one less gang member to worry about. You know, that's the sentiments of humanity. And I've got to be honest, I was not as broken up about that gang member dying as I would have been if the story would have spoken of some young child who innocently was killed. Why do we think that way? What is that about us? I actually believe that is not an error in thinking. That is a correct way of thinking. Because the greatness of a sin is determined by who it is administered upon. Follow with me. This is an illustration that I received from president of a seminary during a camp meeting to just demonstrate how this works in our way of thinking. If there were to be mosquitoes flying around in this building today, and one landed on my arm, and as I'm preaching, I smack it and kill it, there would be very little moral outrage from the congregation. In fact, if you're like me, you probably think, good, one less mosquito. Why did I kill that mosquito? Because it pestered me. It had a crime against me. It tried to take my blood. And I'm going to punish that mosquito for doing that. There's no moral outrage over the loss of a mosquito. However, just imagine this morning if I were preaching here and a little yappy dog came running up and grabbed my leg and started doing that. And what if I turned around and stomped on the dog? Would there be some moral outrage? Well, for some of you, maybe. Some of you maybe not. You're like, good, one less yappy dog. But there is a difference, isn't there? There is a problem in our minds, in our hearts. Immediately we go, wait, that's man's best friend. That was a mosquito. There's a difference there. Take this a little bit more extreme. What if I am on a trip and I'm staying in a motel and next to me there is this baby that is just crying and crying and crying and pestering me and pestering me? I won't go any further with the illustration because I think you understand. If I were to execute the same judgment on the mosquito, the dog, and then the baby, there would be moral outrage, wouldn't there? And should there be? Yes, there should be. I would suggest with the baby, obviously, image bearer of God, but even with the dog, I think there should be a moral outrage. It's one of God's beautiful creations. I think mosquitoes happen to develop after the fall. But there is a moral outrage. Why? What has changed? Has my actions changed? Has what I've done changed at all? No, nothing changed in what I did. What changed was the value of the one that I judged, right? What changed was the value from mosquito to dog to baby. In other words, the greater the value, the greater the sin committed against it. That's justice. That's the way it should be, right? So now imagine, what is sin? And who is sin really against? David said in Psalm 53, after he had sinned horribly against a woman, his captain, a soldier, and an entire nation, he said this in praying to God: "Against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this wickedness in thy sight." Some people have a hard time understanding how it could be that God could send us to an eternity in hell in torment. How is that fair, that the sins of 70 plus years of life results in eternity in hell? It is fair. And this is why it is fair. Every sin we have committed is a sin against an infinite, holy, eternal God. Therefore, what is only fair is an infinite, eternal, and wholly separate punishment. That's all that could be fair. That's what's just. In fact, those that would believe that that there is not an eternity in hell facing the sinner really are the unjust ones. And we know that deep down inside. We know that justice must be taken care of. Every time we sin, we know deep down that we are deserving of an eternal torment in a lake of fire. We know that. We just don't like to contemplate it. We know it. Romans chapter 3, just a few chapters before this, turn back there. This is the description that God has for the sinner, for every human being on the face of this earth. Verse 9, he says, "What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proved, both Jews and Gentiles, that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Friends, I don't think God can be any clearer as to who needs grace. I don't think God can be any clearer as to the state of man without grace. Every mouth must be stopped. Do you realize what that means? We have to just shut up and realize we are all guilty before God. It doesn't matter how good a person thinks they are or how good everyone else thinks they are. The law proves to us that we are sinners and that we are all guilty before God. Why do we need grace? Because we are guilty. And if we are guilty, we know justice demands an infinite, eternal judgment. Do you understand that if you don't stand within the grace of God today, if His grace is not being poured out on you today, you are standing in the judgment of God? The wrath of God is waiting to be poured out upon you. As Jonathan Edwards, the preacher, put it, you are being dangled over the pit of hell by a thin strand of spider web. You're being dangled and waiting for the Creator to just release it. That is what it means to stand in the wrath of God. And if you do not stand in God's grace, you stand in His wrath.